Every one of us has two wolves inside. I don't know if you're aware of that, but we do. One of the wolves is anger, greed, resentment, dishonesty, all things like that. The second wolf is happiness, love, honesty, gratitude, integrity, and things of that ilk. Now, do you know which wolf wins in the end? The one you feed. That's exactly right. So the story I'm going to share with you, and I hope you will truly engage with me in this journey. It's an interesting, intriguing journey. So I'll just start by saying, during this time I have to, and this is kind of risky. Anytime, and all of you are business people, you know exactly what I'm saying. Anytime you have to stand in front of someone and share something where, in a sense, you failed, that's risky, because you have to expose your tender underbelly, right? It means that you weren't perfect, that you tried to do some things and maybe came up short, maybe made some tactical errors or judgmental errors. But in the end, I assure you, you'll discover that my integrity remained intact. And we had to navigate through some very treacherous waters along the way. So what I did was I thought about what to give this as a title. And as you can see, this is very appropriate. It's a metaphor, but I entitled it Chinese Dragon or Trojan Horse. And just to illustrate that by way of metaphor, let me show you a couple of things. So in Chinese culture, the dragon is a very significant mythical creature. But if you'll look, part of what it symbolized was power, strength, and good luck for people who were considered worthy of it. And therefore, going back eons in history in China, you'll find that all the emperors used that symbolism very powerfully. The dragon was very symbolic of the power that they held. And I use that because the story I'm going to tell you involves a journey that my business, a private business that I ran for a lot of years on the side, went to China, to Bejing specifically, and we'll get real into that. But I went there honestly believing one thing, only to discover in the throes of all that we were doing that there were other things at work that weren't quite as honest and on the up and up as they should have been. In fact, I confronted greed and corruption and all kinds of things head on. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, the lessons and how we learned those. The second half of that metaphor involves then a Trojan horse. So what I thought was good luck, good fortune, the way it evolved, ended up being a Trojan horse. And a Trojan horse, if you remember the story, which I've just briefly outlined, but it's anything, the very end of that is actually the best description. It now symbolizes a person or thing intended to undermine or destroy anything. And that's exactly what we confronted. What I thought was a Chinese dragon, a symbol of good fortune, ended up being a Trojan horse. And I'll tell you how we got to Bejing in a moment. But our purpose in going ultimately was that in 2008 they were going to stage the Summer Olympic Games in Bejing. And the year that I ended up going was 2005, and it was just an electric atmosphere. It was exciting, there was anticipation, construction was going 24/7. They were building all the stadiums, the venues, and high-rise buildings. It was a very exciting place to be at the time. But as I discovered that you don't have to go to any particular country. Start right here in the good old US of A and go to any country that you select, and you will find that there are scoundrels. There were people whose greed and avarice and corruption undermined what should have been ultimately a very prosperous and wonderful experience. And I will have to say that while I'm talking about China, I have to tell you right up front, I absolutely love China. It was one of the most magnificent experiences of my life. Went there twice for extended periods, and in Bejing specifically and surrounding areas. And I love the Chinese people. We love the country and all that we got to do. And I think you'll see that evidenced as we go along. But before I tell you about all of that, I have to lay a foundation. The foundation for me begins in eastern Kentucky. In this house. This is on a up in the hills, a very remote area of eastern Kentucky near West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky convergence on the Ohio River. And this was a house that was homesteaded and built by my maternal grandparents. 75 acres of pristine land, great hunting, etc. Significance to me is that out of the entire family, I was the only one born in this house. I was actually born in the middle of April in a horrible snowstorm on the dining room table. And my mom could not get out to go to a doctor. And bless his heart, the doctor who came to her to deliver me, ultimately I bear one of his names. My mom was so impressed by that she actually gave me, his name was Dr. Bennett McWhorter. And so on my birth certificate is Carl David Bennett Dalton in honor of that doctor. But why is this significant? When I was ready to begin high school, a series of great misfortunes and horrible things in my past. Prior to that time, I was 14 years old. I was ready to start high school, and I came from a very, very poor, Appalachian poor background, a very abused background. It was pretty horrid, some pretty horrid stuff. That's a whole story unto itself. But my maternal grandmother at the time was 88 years old already. She agreed to become my legal guardian. She lived by herself at this time. My grandfather had passed away, and she took me in. And that thus began a very intriguing journey. My grandmother was an amazing woman, 88 years old. She was pioneer stock. She got up every morning at 5 a.m. And I used to wonder, I actually wondered why she would get up at 5 a.m. every morning and sit at her dining room table and read her Bible. I didn't know she was praying for me. Very significant. Prayer is powerful, as you will see. It plays into this story very powerfully. Well, I made a mistake very early on telling my grandmother only one time that I couldn't do something. I said the words, "I can't," when she told me that I would have to learn how to weave rugs on her loom and sell them in order to pay for my high school, because she had a very meager pension and could not afford to send me to school. And I said, "Grandma, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that." And she looked at me with those steely Irish eyes, and I will never to this day forget that. She said, "Don't ever say I can't." It was the first time anyone had ever espoused belief in me. And I built upon that, and I learned how to do a few things really well. And darn it, I tried to get John to be my volunteer this morning. One of the things I learned to do really well, believe it or not, was I learned how to throw things very accurately. You name it. It didn't matter what it was, a ball, a rock, anything. But one of the things I learned to throw very well was hatchets, axes, tomahawks, and I am very good at it, by the way. I never could shoot very well, but if I got it in my sights, with a hatchet, I could do pretty well. So this is actually one of my throwing hawks. And I asked John, I was going to give you a demonstration, but I couldn't convince him to stand over against that wall with a balloon in his mouth. I don't know why, but he just wouldn't do it this morning, so we'll have to pass on that. But my point is that because of the belief that my grandmother instilled in me, which started there, I believed I could do anything. I developed that mindset very powerfully, that I could do anything. Anything I don't know how to do, I'm going to learn how to do, and I will do. I'll be able to do it. And shortly after, about a year after I moved there, to give you evidence of that, I was helping my mom and two of my younger siblings. They were tending a field. It was a tomato crop. And right next to that field was a bootlegger who was notorious in that area, who made and sold moonshine whiskey. And he owned the county, basically. It was a dry county. No legal liquor was sold. But he owned the property that looked at the field. And he had a one-room house where he, his wife, and 18 children lived. One room. And I knew where his still was. I knew where all of them were hidden around those hills. But my mom's basically hoeing some plants, and pretty soon this guy gets up, make a long story short, he has a 12-gauge shotgun, comes outside, sits down in their outhouse facing the field. My mom throws a dirt clod at the chickens. He gets up and shoots her with a shotgun 3 times. So here I am, about a 125-pound scrawny kid, 15 years old by now. I had to sprint to the other end of the field where she was. She had collapsed. My mom was a pretty big woman. I picked her up. Thank God for adrenaline and just prayer. I picked her up and carried her to the other end of the field, put her in a car that we had parked there on a little country lane, grabbed my younger brother and sister and stuffed them in the car. I'd never driven a car. I'd watched people. I'd never driven a car. I didn't know how to do that. But I knew I could do it. I put her in the car, threw something on her to stop the bleeding, and headed off for town. As we started, his oldest son, 18 years old, stepped out and started shooting our windows out with a rifle. That was a pretty tough thing to face as a 15-year-old kid. But you know what? I never once believed I couldn't do that. Never once. And that mindset has stuck with me and has prevailed throughout everything I've ever done. So let's fast forward. One of the things I've done in my long career is I ran my own company on the side for 32 years. Very successful, high-end security company. I specialized in dignitary protection for celebrities, for heads of government, for business executives, their businesses, their families. It took me a lot of places around the world. Did it very successfully. I was attending a convention in Las Vegas at the Sands Expo and Convention Center. And as a matter of fact, it's going on again this weekend. It's called ISC West, a huge international security conference and exposition. I parked in a parking structure with my wife and our business partner, Josh, and we were trying to find how to get to this convention. They had just freshly painted this 10,000 car parking garage, and there were literally no markings on anything. The stalls, the walls, you had no idea what level you were on, where to go, no directional signs. And as I get out of my car, I figure, well, that's okay, we'll find it. I see this very elegantly dressed Chinese man and his wife looking obviously very upset, very perplexed. And I stopped because I tend to do that. And I said, excuse me, I see you're kind of looking befuddled. May I help you? And he explained quickly that they were looking for this convention and didn't have a clue how to get there. And I said, well, why don't you walk along with us and we'll find it together. That began this journey. It turns out, as we're walking, it's about a 20-minute walk from there to the convention site. He explained to me that he was there as an emissary of the very high level in the government of the People's Republic of China. And when I told him what I did and what my company did, his eyes kind of lit up and he stopped me literally and said, I think my problems have been solved. How would you like to come to China and do those things? I thought, you know, who is this guy, right? Well, that brief introduction, actually, he invited me to come and join him for dinner back in Los Angeles. Remember, we were in Las Vegas. He said, can you meet me for dinner in 2 days? I said, absolutely. So 2 days later, we met here at the Bonaventure Hotel, downtown Los Angeles. We had dinner and we talked business. And he said, to assure you that I'm sincere, I will have a letter from a very high level of the government in China sent to you personally, delivered, inviting you to come there and do what we're talking about. Now bear in mind, what he had told me I would be doing would be to train their military, their national police, and their private security in how to do security for the Olympic Games in 2008. I was pretty excited about that because I've done this. This is stuff I know how to do. And I was excited to be there and, you know, the whole proposal. I said, how soon do we need to be there? He said, 3 weeks from now. I said, now that's pretty tall order, but we'll scramble. The initial trip was to be an introduction, meet all these officials, talk specifics about the business and all of that. But I said, next morning I was picked up in a police vehicle and transported to this location. This is the Great Hall of the People right on Tiananmen Square. Monolithic building, unbelievably huge. And we're taken to the very top level, and I'm introduced outside of the room to a couple of officials. I don't remember now who they were. But he told me, he says, you're going to meet several very high-level people inside of this room. Well, I had done my homework. I knew about the protocols and all the things you must pay attention to if you intend to do business there. And I knew about all that. I had done crash courses in this stuff just to be prepared. I had no idea, though, how prepared I needed to be. I walk in this room, and on one side is myself, my wife, and our partner, Josh, our doctor, who I had met in Las Vegas, his wife, and an interpreter, who I did not pick. On the opposite side of this gargantuan table, and it was huge, the biggest conference room I've ever been in my life, largest table I've ever seen in my life, sat 50 officials on the other side of that table. That's how big, just to give you an idea, they were all in a row. That's how big this table and room was. And I noticed right away, being the observant person that I am, that there were military uniforms of some very high-ranking people, very high-ranking police officials, and a lot of people that were later introduced as high-level representatives of the Communist Party. So we did all the introductions, and then I was on. And the most daunting thing I've ever done in my life, bar none, was to endure the next 2 hours. I asked, and insisted actually, that the interpreter, as closely as possible, interpret what I was going to say verbatim. I said, I don't want any ambiguity. I don't want any room for error or mistakes on what I'm saying. He assured me that they would do that. However, I have reason to believe that much of what I said was not translated the way I wanted. For example, I said, I'm proud and excited to be here in your country. I'm excited to do what you're challenging me to do. But your country and your culture has a history of being very closed, very secretive, very guarded. You're not open. If you want me to do what you've asked me to do, you're going to have to change, for me anyway, because I need to see certain things to form a baseline of where you're at right now. If you're willing to the extent that you're willing to do that, I will do a good job for you, I promise you. I started out with it. And I have to tell you, I had to reach way down in here, and I was praying just before I started saying this stuff. I have to tell you, I honestly stood there and prayed silently that give me the strength, give me the courage to say exactly what I need to say. And I did. However, I don't believe that all of that was translated exactly as I intended, because some of the questions that I started getting, interestingly enough, segued from training into all of this technology, much of which I knew our government prohibited us sending to China, exporting to China. There was some military grade stuff that was asked for openly in this meeting that I knew we couldn't do, and I had to say, I will tell you again that don't ask me to do anything that violates any law of my country. I will not do it, and I won't violate my integrity. So as long as you understand that, we can do business, and I'll do a good job for you. Well, I quickly found out that everywhere we went after that meeting, we were surveilled pretty closely. Our hotel room was bugged. I've been in this business a long time. I know what bugs look like. I know where they're put. I found them. I knew that we were surveilled everywhere. My business is surveillance. I know how to surveil people. I knew when I was being followed and by whom. And I actually set them up a couple of times. I wanted to verify my suspicions. And so, I pulled a couple of my own little tricks. And sure enough, I caught them red-handed planting devices in my room. Caught them red-handed. They quickly made other excuses about what they were doing, fixing the plumbing and things like that. But our internet was barred. They hacked our computer. They hacked our telephones. Basically, I had to tell my team, stop what you're doing. Don't use your computer. Do not use your phone. And be very mindful of conversations that you have inside of your hotel room. And we did that. You'll notice this slide I've put up is one example. Security is pretty tight all over Bejing, and in particular around Tiananmen Square. You may remember some of the incredible things that have happened in Tiananmen Square. It has a long and vivid history of the uprisings that have been held there. Tank Man, the student who protested in front of a tank in 1986, I believe it was, June of 86. And I was very mindful of all of that as I stood there and took this in. I was very mindful. I also remembered that it was as recently as 1992 that our relations with China were reestablished by President Nixon. So that wasn't that long ago. And all these things were constantly in my mind, okay? But I have to tell you, having said that, even though they did all these things, they opened up the red carpet to us. We were truly treated royally. Everything we wanted to do, bar none. All the big tourist things, except we had private tours, dinners, anything we wanted. It didn't matter. All I had to do was ask. And by the way, one other thing, and I had to kind of keep this from my wife and my partner for a while. There were a lot of other things offered to me as well, which was another set of little red flags. It was intimated to me by several officials that if I wanted sex, for example, all I had to do was ask. If I wanted women, if I wanted this, if I wanted that. And constantly I had to be mindful of my integrity, because I knew that I was being watched for that little crack in my armor, and I had to be mindful of that at every moment. And I did. I was very aware of that. But a couple of fun things. That was just to illustrate the enormity of, again, of Tiananmen Square. There's a much thinner, more handsome me right there. This is my wife, Norma, over here. Our partner, Josh, the doctor's son, Ben, his wife, Heidi, and these are all very high-level scientists. They're some PhD-level guys that are pretty brilliant. In this center is where they do all of the national forensics for all the crimes that occur and all of that stuff. Their laboratories are there, and on and on. It's quite an intriguing place. One of the things that they did was invite us to go in the just gigantic room where they were doing like 30 autopsies all at one time of homicide victims. And, you know, being the old cop, I was kind of intrigued by that. But I discovered that nobody dies of gunshot wounds there. They're all either bludgeonings or sharp-pointed instruments or knives, because nobody has guns. And all the autopsies they were doing that particular day were deaths by blunt force trauma, which was kind of intriguing. But we were able to walk right in amongst them and just do whatever. And maybe some of you can tell me why, but the one thing I asked to see that they wouldn't show me ever was inside of a fire station. I asked several times. And they showed me a lot of stuff, things I never in the world imagined I would get to see, but they never would show me a fire station. And I don't know why. One of the things I have to share with you, though, is this. I wanted to go see the Great Wall. And there's a little town or an area called Bejing outside of Bejing. It's a famous tourist place. But you can do two tours. You can do a south wall or a north wall. And if you notice, the north wall is pretty steep and very vigorous to get up there. It's about a 3-mile walk from where you depart. And of course, you know, I saw a little plaque there on the wall. We'd hike partway up, and then you run into a plaque that says, "He who has never been to the top of the Great Wall is not a true man." So of course, you know, it's like, come on, you know. So my wife departed at that point and came down this little slide right here. I took my partner Josh and the doctor's son. I dragged them on up to the top of this place, and I get up there and I'm thinking, yeah, you know, this is pretty cool. And then I see this little 100-year-old Chinese man sitting there, and he says, yeah, you made it to the top of the wall. If you want, I engrave a buckle for you. So he took and engraved my name on a buckle. Then I realized, how did he get up here? And every single day, this guy literally is 100 years old. He had to carry this huge package of these brass buckles up to the top of that wall. And if you made it up to the top, he'd engrave one for you. So I wasn't feeling all that hot. It was a pretty rigorous climb, but I have to tell you, it was fun. So our second trip actually was where things really got interesting. We were invited specifically after 3 weeks to come back and be part of this. Every 2 years in Bejing, they host this International Police Technology Exposition. The other thing that started becoming apparent to me was I was getting more and more requests, not so much for the training, but for certain technology and equipment. And that kind of was a little red flag, actually, because that was not what had been depicted to me initially. That, by the way, was held. It's not held there anymore, but that's at they have a very large military museum in Bejing, which is an amazing place, and that's where that expo was being held at. So the next couple of pictures I'll show you were actually at that expo, and this is the three of us, my wife, my partner Josh, and myself. And Centurion Technology and Equipment Company, LLC, was a second company that I had to form in order to handle the technology and equipment requests that I was getting. I couldn't do it under the existing company that I had, which was specifically just security related. But that's my company, Centurion. The doctor you see in the center is very significant. Remember him. That's Dr. Sam Young, the one holding the paper. He and I were interviewed countless times by national media while we were there, and particularly during this expo, I had a camera in my face about every 15 minutes, it seemed, for a few days. And something very interesting about this slide. If you'll notice, that's our booth. It's a double wide booth. And on the right is my company. Centurion Technology and Equipment. And on the left is another company. It turns out that that was totally a shell company set up while I did the work. They were going to reap the profits. I didn't know that for a long time, but that's the truth. That was set up specifically as a shell company to make the profits. And it was several corrupt players involved in doing all that without getting into the nitty-gritty details. So fast forward on through this. The day we left China for the second time, having done what we could do up to that point, I had a mandate to go back and do a bunch of things when I got back to the U.S. That night we were feted at a dinner. It turned out it was almost a state-level dinner to thank and honor us at this facility. This is the National Museum of China, also on Tiananmen Square. We walked in not knowing we were the guests of honor, and there were over 500 people in this banquet room. And we were led up to the head table, and just repeatedly, all kinds of honors just bestowed upon us. Whoa. So, my pride's way up here now. My ego is now fully invested in all this, right? And I'm thinking, all right, we're going to go back and do this. So, I'm back at home now, and I'm spending just an incredible amount of time and resources and money to develop some things that I agreed to do and bring back to China. 11:30 on August 19th, I get a call. My phone rings. A good friend of mine says, "Hey Dave, do you get the daily news?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he says, "Well, do you have a fax machine?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He says, "Well, I think there's something here you better take a look at right now." He knew what I was involved in and who the players were, and he's a retired sergeant from the department, and he faxed me this article from the Daily News. And I want you to take a close look at what it says. The medical doctor it's referencing was Dr. Sam Young, my host in China, my entree to all that we were doing. He had been arrested coming back from China. The FBI met him at an airplane as he disembarked and arrested him for Medicare fraud. He was an MD, and he had set up a bunch of bogus clinics here in the United States, around the Los Angeles area in 5 different places. And he had billed, it ended up being over $7 million over a period of 3 or 4 years in Medicare fraud. And it finally caught up with him. He was arrested by the FBI, held on no bail. He was a flight risk. And I have to tell you, at that moment, I sat there 11:30 at night looking at this article. I read it about 20 times, and I felt like I had been gut kicked a few times. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go from there. What's my next step? What should I be thinking of? So what occurred to me immediately was, if he was arrested by the FBI, that means the FBI has been following him, tailing him, is very aware of every move, both here and internationally. And I immediately made the connection that, they've been watching me. So I said, this is not going to work. I need to call them proactively. So I did. And I set up an immediate appointment. I tracked down the agent who had done that investigation. I said, I need to meet with you, like right now, yesterday. I took every business card, every name, every piece of paper, every email, every correspondence I'd had with these people with me, and I met with a group of FBI agents in this building in West Los Angeles, the federal building, and it was a pretty extensive meeting. And I said, I want you to understand that no matter what Dr. Young was involved in, I wasn't. And you can check anything you want to, but my integrity is intact. And you can verify that by any way you want to. But I did not do anything illegal, ever. And they said, well, we want you to come back 1 more week from now. And there's a different group of agents we want you to talk to that do things on the international side. I said, okay, all right, I'll be there. So this time I took my partner Josh with me. We went back there exactly 1 week later, a whole different group of agents. And I told Josh, being an old cop, I knew this game. I said, now here's what they're going to do when we get there. They're going to tell you to wait out here. They're going to take me back there and start asking me some questions that ultimately lead to this. They're going to want us to go back to China, continue business, and do some other things on their behalf. The answer is no, with a capital N and a capital O. I said, make sure you understand that clearly. We are not going to do that, and lots of reasons for that. Now, that was a big thing for me to say, because by this time, I want you to know, I had invested a huge amount of money, time, and effort into putting together a whole bunch of things they had asked me to do and bring back to China. That was not an easy decision to make. But that's what I told them. So sure enough, Josh and I go down there. They did exactly what I said. After 20 minutes of this, I looked at them and said, look, let's just pause right here. I know where this is going. The answer is no. They kind of laughed and looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? And I explained it to them. He said, yeah, you're right. So then they brought him in and started asking him, and I stopped him again, and I said, no, the answer is no. We are not going back to China for these two reasons. There's only two outcomes that will come of this. Either we will end up in a Chinese prison, which I had been to, and I tell you, I don't ever want to go there, or I'll end up being found in some little hutong, dirt street somewhere with my throat cut. And neither one of those options appealed to me very much. It turns out that my dear friend Dr. Young was not only a crook here in this country, he was also well connected with two very prolific, they're our equivalent of the mafia in China. I know the names of the two groups he was affiliated with, but that was brought to bear. So I made the right decision not to get involved any further. So, cut through a lot of stuff, but it led me to this. Now, these are all things, mind you, I had run my company for a very long time. I have a group of lessons. You don't have to write these down. I actually put them on a piece of paper for you. But I just quickly want to recap these and toward our closing here. These are actual lessons that I had to relearn. And I had learned these things early on running my own company. There's no free lunch. Now, all those things that they paid for, places they took me and spent money on me and lavished things on me, that was not a free lunch. It was nice, but there was a cost, a dear cost involved. And the cost was that they wanted, ultimately there was a lot of corrupt people involved in this process, and they wanted to corrupt my integrity, and I said no. And I'm glad that I held that point. So there's no free lunch. There's a cost. Do your homework. If I had had a little more time, a little more effort to find out a little bit more about my host, I would have never entered into this venture on any level. But I didn't take the time to do that, and I knew better. Trust your instincts. There were countless times along this path where my instincts were saying, you know what, you need to get out of this. You need to call a halt to this right now. And, by then I was pretty invested. My ego, my pride, my time, my effort, and money were deeply invested. And I decided, no, you know what, I can bail this out. I can make this work. So on and on. Don't make rushed decisions. I had to have a clear understanding of roles and expectations. I didn't. We also didn't have a written contract or agreement. And the doctor kept stalling me. That was one of the red flags that kept going off. Why won't you sign this agreement, doctor? He was supposed to do that on his trip back from Bejing when he got arrested. We had already had a meeting for him to sign the contract. Never made it there. He got arrested. Get your own interpreter, one that you trust, and use them. Real important. I will tell you this internationally. Distributed company investments and losses equally. I brought my partner in because of the expertise he had, but not by, he didn't bring any monetary resources to the table. So the losses were all mine, and I shouldn't have done that. Obtain competent legal representation, should go without saying, and have a solid but flexible business plan. Couple little things just in ending there. Actually, my wife found this, but fail simply means first attempt in learning. The end is effort never dies. And no, it just means the next opportunity. And there you have it. That's a real quick version of a very detailed and horrible and gut-wrenching story that had ups and downs, but I will say this in finality. I wouldn't have missed this opportunity for the world. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, one of the most challenging. Cost me a lot on a lot of levels, but I would not have missed this experience for anything. It goes back to what my grandmother told me: never say no, never say you can't do something. I believed I could. And so hope that you learned something from this little lesson as well. Thank you.